zero emission infrastructure or union jobs. Yes, you heard me right. The EPA is funding a program that is intended to support union jobs. And that's in addition to the $500 million that the bipartisan infrastructure bill provided to these same types of port upgrade programs. And so the EPA is saying, well, we didn't think that went far enough, so we're going to give even more money to advance these two goals, one of which seems like it's connected to environmental and air and water quality, the other union jobs, which doesn't feel like it's exactly directly connected to the environment.
Seems to me like the type of thing that was put in multiple agencies or pushed through whatever avenue. This is probably the manifestation at the EPA. I'm wondering if we'd find them in multiple agencies as we keep digging in.
Yeah, I think so. I'm sure there's a lot of duplication, and we'll hopefully get to talk about that as we continue through the series.
Americans are capable of achieving extraordinary things when they have the freedom and opportunity to do so. This is American Potential.
Hi, everyone. My name is David Fromm, and I'm the new host for the American Potential podcast. Today, we're doing another episode in our Big Ideas for Smaller Government series. If you're new to this series, here's what we do. We take a deep dive into a federal agency or department, sharing how they're wasting tax dollars, and discuss where cuts could be made to rein in overspending with a goal of cutting $2 trillion. Today, we're talking about the Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA, which was created in the 1970s under Richard Nixon after public concern over air quality and contaminated water. But today, that same agency has been known to overstep its authority and sometimes gets taken to court over it. We've covered the EPA in multiple episodes, including a conversation with West Virginia's former Attorney General, now Governor, about the case he brought against the EPA, which was a huge win for keeping unelected bureaucrats in check. We've also done an episode on vehicle emission standards, which would have raised car prices and stripped Americans of choices. So I want to welcome welcome back today's guest, Jeremiah Mosteller, who is the Policy Director for Americans for Prosperity.
David, I'm so excited to be here again with you today and to keep talking about what I believe is both of our favorite subjects.
I mean, I could talk all day about cutting government bureaucracy. I think we've said multiple times, President Trump's signal saying, hey, we need to get serious about this by creating the Department of Government Efficiency, having Elon Musk be involved, a high-profile guy, and soliciting ideas. And so I'm so pleased that Americans for Prosperity as an organization can jump into this and we can say, hey, let's highlight some of the great areas to cut, because Lord knows there are plenty of areas, including the EPA. So getting to it, just how big is the EPA?
Yeah, well, David, you know me. I brought my whiteboard again, so I'm going to move over there real quick and talk a little bit about that.
Excellent. Always love the whiteboard.
Yeah. So, David, I think it's worth starting with a little contrast, because we talked about HHS last time, and EPA is a very different animal for two specific reasons. So I think first it's worth flagging for listeners that EPA is an independent agency, not a department of the federal government. So in a nutshell, what that means is they don't report to a cabinet official. The EPA administrator is not a cabinet official. They are their own thing. They don't report up through another department. Unlike HHS, which we talked about last time, has so many agencies underneath it, EPA is kind of off on an island by itself. Another thing that sets EPA apart is its size. It's less than 1% of the federal budget in comparison to what we talked about, the big size of HHS last time. So its budget is $2.86 billion. So that's billion compared to trillion for HHS. Mm-hmm. But even EPA has a lot of subcomponents, like we talked about last time with HHS. They have 10 regional offices, and they have 12 issue-focused offices, which are based in their headquarters in D.C. And so those issue-focused offices are everything from the Office of Air and Radiation to the Office of Environmental Justice and Civil Rights to the Office of Water. And so they cover a lot of different topics, some of which I think folks might have questions about why EPA is doing those things, and I'm looking forward to talking about that today.
Yeah, well, as we said when we kind of started this episode, we've talked about the EPA a lot. It has been rife with just abuse and overreach, and I know that on the spending level that's true too. So to kind of jump into it, my understanding is the EPA gave $50 million to a group, but it wasn't for anything to do with air or water quality.
That's right.
What was the money used for?
Yeah, so they gave $50 million to the Environmental Justice Alliance. And the purpose of giving this money to this nonprofit was actually to help other nonprofits apply for EPA funding. So the EPA is giving $50 million for an organization to help other organizations apply for funding.
Wow, that seems like a great use of taxpayer dollars. Sarcasm meant there. Was this the only group that received funds for something like this?
No, the EPA actually gave out $600 million to 11 different groups to do the exact same thing.
Wow.
I think this is just the perfect example of government inefficiency. The fact that an agency needs to give out $600 million to help groups help other groups apply for funding just shows that the process they have in place to give out their grant funding, whether it's appropriate or not, is just too burdensome for these organizations to actually secure it when they have good ideas.
Yeah, I mean, you'd kind of hope that staff at the actual agency might be really helpful to make let's say the groups are worthy of funding. Like it's something, let's just make a giant assumption that way. I kind of think that staff at the actual agency would be best positioned to help them understand how to go through the process and access this funding.
Well, I mean, this funding seems like it's an implicit admission that the agency staff are just putting up barriers. They're not actually trying to help people get this money. And so they actually are bringing in external experts to help these folks do this, or allegedly external experts. I have questions about whether the Environmental Justice Alliance is an expert in federal funding or not.
Yeah, that is really concerning. Well, also concerning, I understand there was a program, there's funding for a program in Colorado to monitor air quality, but the EPA is having problems finding anyone to take the funds. So why isn't anyone taking the taxpayer money?
Yeah, so EPA gave out $2.9 million in Colorado to a variety of different groups to test air quality and track it. But shortly after they awarded the grants, two of those groups said, hey, we don't want the money anymore. It's costing us more resources and time to fill out the forms, do interviews, engage in meetings, doing reporting than the money that we would actually get to run the program. So the operations of running the program were more burdensome than the money they were getting. So they said, no thanks, we're going to send the money back, and just walked away from the program.
I mean, I guess I'd call that a market signal.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
If the people who are, if organizations that probably exist on government money feel like they can't continue to exist by taking the government money because it's too burdensome or whatever, then we're obviously doing something wrong. And why are we putting this government money out there? I mean, I just always go back to the idea. We'll talk about government money, and I'll fall in that trap of talking about government money. But these are tax dollars. This is our money. And I think that so often, people become disconnected. I think our leaders become disconnected from that. Oftentimes, certainly folks working in government at multiple levels become disconnected from that. So, I always feel a burden to try to remind people that that's the reality of what we're talking about here. So turning to ways to save taxpayer money, there's been an idea for a green bank. What is that?
Yeah, so green banks are the special financial institutions. It's a little bit of a stretch of that word, but essentially they're government-subsidized banks that try to fund environmental or clean energy projects.
That sounds like a multiple-layer awful idea.
Yeah.
Government-subsidized bank.
Yes.
Just jumps off the page to me.
Well, David, it's really an attempt to try and apply market principles to something that is inherently government. And so these banks are giving out loans, which means they will be repaid versus grants. But at the end of the day, their goal is to advance like environmental justice or prevent climate change, not make profit for their shareholders. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of times, based on what we know about these banks, they're giving loans to people that will merely just repay what they were given, not pay any interest like a typical bank would do to ensure that we're keeping up with the rate of inflation. So they're not worried about whether the money is wasted. They're just worried about advancing a policy goal.
So, and maybe you covered this, but how would the bank be different from how funds are currently distributed?
Yeah. So I think there's 2 points. One, there's the point that there is interest, but they're not actually taking into account risk of whether they're going to get their money back. They're focused, like I said, on the main goal, which is to advance environmental justice or to reduce climate change. They're not focused on ROI, shareholder value, the sustainability of the company that wants to do the project. They don't care. They just said, well, we want more solar panels, so we're going to fund more solar panels.
Yeah.
Or we want to advance climate justice, so we're going to fund climate justice programs.
Yeah, it would really seem like the incentives are misaligned here, and that doesn't bode well for the success of a program or for the smart use of taxpayer money.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's an attempt to apply market principles to a government program, and we both know that doesn't make it any less of a government program or any less ineffective.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, what cuts would you propose that the EPA move towards to help us get to our goal of cutting $2 trillion in government?
Well, David, I was hoping to come today to tell you that my recommendation would be to cut this $27 billion green bank program. Mm-hmm. But sadly, the Biden administration rushed all the funds out the door in the last minute to ensure that the new administration could not cut this program on day one. And so I can't say that, but I have some other good ideas that I would love to share with you if you're open to them.
Yeah. I'd love to hear them.
So there's another program that the EPA has been funding, which is about $3 billion that is funding improvements to our nation's ports. And so the two improvements they're funding is zero emission infrastructure or union jobs. Yes, you heard me right. The EPA is funding a program that is intended to support union jobs. And that's in addition to the $500 million that the bipartisan infrastructure bill provided to these same types of port upgrade programs. And so the EPA is saying, well, we didn't think that went far enough, so we're going to give even more money to advance these two goals, one of which seems like it's connected to environmental and air and water quality, the other union jobs, which doesn't feel like it's exactly directly connected to the environment.
Yeah, it kind of seems to me like the type of thing that was put in multiple agencies or pushed through whatever avenue probably the previous administration, previous Congresses could figure out, hey, I want to help out. I care about climate change, and I really want to promote organized labor. How can I do that in how many different areas? And this is probably the manifestation at the EPA. I'm wondering if we'd find them in multiple agencies as we keep digging in.
Yeah, I think so. I'm sure there's a lot of duplication, and we'll hopefully get to talk about that as we continue through the series.
Yeah, I can't imagine our ports, actually, those are also the highest priorities for our ports. I mean, ports are a big deal.
Yeah.
And they definitely need upgrades in some cases, but, I can't imagine those are the highest priorities. So if our listeners have an idea of something that should be cut, where's a good place for them to share that?
Yeah, so I think, David, it's worth saying, so our total cut from this series so far has been $532.9 billion. So we made a lot of progress with our one last year. We made a little progress today, but we don't have a monopoly on good ideas. We believe that there are likely thousands to millions of good ideas from Americans across this country about how to make government more efficient and how to cut costs. And so we're asking folks to go to dogeidea.com, submit their ideas, and then you and I will have the opportunity to talk about them here today, but we'll also be taking them to members of Congress and to the administration to elevate their good ideas as well.
That's great. I mean, one of the things I really have appreciated about being part of Americans' Prosperity is that I feel like we legitimately try to raise people's voices to decision makers. In this case, members of Congress, members of the administration, and I feel like this is kind of a practical way in which we can really do that, is to legitimately take people's ideas that they've submitted and have, along with our federal affairs team and other folks who are talking to congressional offices every day, bring those to them and say, hey, why don't we think about this?
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
That's super exciting.
Yeah.
So, well, again, always wonderful to have you talking about cutting government waste. Well, look forward to some future episodes together.
I'm looking forward to continuing to making progress to that $2 trillion number there. Let's keep doing it, David. We can find more.
We'll whittle it down.
Yeah.
Hey, we all want to live in a country that's been, that has clean air and water, but that doesn't mean that that unelected bureaucrats get to waste taxpayer money and take away options for the American people. So as Jeremiah said, go to dogeidea.com and submit your ideas. It's very, very, very exciting. So if you like this episode and would like to stay connected with the podcast, be sure to like and subscribe to our channel, as well as following us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Always remember, liberty and freedom are easily taken for granted. Don't take it for granted. Go out there and defend freedom and liberty. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Thank you for listening to American Potential. You may listen to more stories from Americans working every day to expand freedom and opportunity in their communities by visiting AmericanPotential.com.